What I am about to share may feel impossible to believe, but I ask you to stay with me. Just 2 nights ago, I experienced something that shook me to my core. I found myself face to face with Jesus, and what he revealed unraveled everything I thought I knew about death, judgment, and the fragile line that separates time from eternity. The question at the heart of this encounter is one you have likely asked yourself in silence, even if only once. What actually happens in the first hour after we die? That very hour, 60 fleeting minutes that open into forever, was unveiled before me in ways I never expected. And I must tell you, it is nothing like what tradition has led us to believe. What Jesus showed me will challenge everything you have heard about heaven, hell, and how God receives His children when they step beyond this world. Before I go deeper, I want you to pause. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is as you listen. It reminds me that I'm not alone in this moment. And if what I share stirs something in your heart, consider subscribing. It gives me the strength to keep opening up the places I would otherwise keep hidden. I'm speaking to you now from the deck behind my home. The canyon stretches out in quiet layers below me, eucalyptus trees reaching into the fading light. The late sun paints the edges of the sky with streaks of gold that slowly surrender to night. This is where I often come when life's deepest questions won't let me go. Tonight feels like one of those sacred evenings. Shadows lengthen, silence gathers, and I find myself speaking of humanity's last passage, the shift from breath to beyond. To understand the weight of what unfolded between Jesus and me, you must first know what happened 3 weeks earlier. I had never before been forced to stare death so directly in the eyes. I was sitting beside the bed of my friend's father, Thomas, 74 years old. His body thinned and weakened after 2 long years of fighting cancer. He was not perfect, but he was gentle, steady, a man who loved his family and was loved in return. Everyone who knew him respected him. I sat there as he drifted in and out of consciousness, his breath shallow, his chest rising with effort, then falling again into silence. And while I held that vigil, the questions tormented me. What truly happens after the final exhale? Does the soul face judgment instantly? Does it tremble with fear? Does a tunnel of light appear? Do loved ones gather at the edge to welcome him, or does he drift without knowing he has died? That first hour, the moment awareness slips beyond the body, felt at once terrifying and strangely beautiful. I realized how little I actually understood, and I knew the questions I asked were not only about Thomas. They were about all of us. Every funeral I had attended, every person I had seen vanish from this world into silence, every whispered story of a final breath, they all echoed back to the same unanswerable mystery. What happens when life yields to eternity? At that very time, we were filming season 6 of The Chosen. Scene after scene dealt with death, resurrection, and eternal life. There I was, portraying Jesus, the one who conquered the grave, while inwardly wrestling with doubts I could not silence. I was supposed to speak with divine certainty, offering peace to the dying, yet inside I felt like a man grasping in the dark. I carried the weight of that contradiction. How could I offer peace if I did not know what awaited the soul? How could I act with authority while privately uncertain? More and more, I feared that I was offering nothing more than well-intentioned illusions. That gap between the character I played and the man I was at night kept me awake. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Thomas's battle ended. I was there as his family surrounded him. His chest stilled. The room fell into a silence heavier than grief itself, thick with mystery. Where was he now? What was happening to him at that very instant? Was he afraid? Could he hear the trembling voices of his wife and children as they clung to his hands? Could he feel their tears soaking his skin? His wife turned toward me, eyes searching mine. Is he okay? Is he at peace? Does he know we're here? Their children echoed her desperate questions. They looked to me not just as a family friend, but as the man who plays Jesus, as though I might hold the answers. And I had none. I recited verses, I offered promises, I gave them the words I knew were expected, yet inside, I was empty. My own heart was just as filled with questions as theirs. Later that day, a message arrived from Thomas's daughter. Her words cut straight through me. Jonathan, I keep wondering what Dad saw when he passed. Did he understand what was happening? Was he frightened? Did Jesus come right away, or is there some waiting place? Please, I need to know he's okay. Her longing mirrored my own. Despite years of Christian teaching, despite embodying Christ before cameras watched, I realized I had no answer. Not one I truly believed, not one born of experience. And more letters came. Fans of The Chosen confided in me about their dying loved ones, their fears, their questions. Some believed my role gave me hidden knowledge. But the truth, I felt like a fraud. Then one letter arrived that broke me completely. A mother wrote of holding her teenage son as he died in a car crash. She whispered to him not to be afraid, that Jesus was coming. Then she confessed, I said it to comfort him, but I don't know if it was true. I don't know what he saw. I need to believe what I told him was real. That confession undid me, because I saw what she was really saying. We don't just want to believe death is peaceful. We need to know. We need to know for ourselves and for those we love. Because when you're holding someone in their final moments, nothing matters more than the truth of what lies beyond. It was no longer an intellectual curiosity for me. It became urgent, sacred, the foundation of hope for the grieving and the wellspring of courage for the living. And that is where my search began. The search for answers consumed me. It was no longer enough to hold on to verses I could not fully grasp or platitudes that felt paper-thin in the silence of grief. I began reading near-death accounts late into the night, each one a flicker of hope that dissolved into contradiction. Some described tunnels of light, others spoke of shadows and silence, and still more insisted the moments after death felt like waking from a dream. The details refused to line up. Where one story promised peace, another whispered confusion. Instead of clarity, I found chaos, and the weight of not knowing pressed even heavier on me. I turned to science, combing through medical reports about what happens to the body as it begins to shut down. Doctors could chart the fading pulse, the slowing brain waves, the final surrender of muscle and breath. But none of that touched the question that mattered most. What happens to awareness? Where does the person, their thoughts, their essence actually go? Medical literature offered silence where my heart needed answers. Then I dove back into theology. I listened to sermons, I read books, I pored over ancient texts. Theologians spoke of heaven and hell, of judgment and grace, but when it came to describing the moment of passing, the language grew vague. Sweeping promises, yes, but little detail about the step-by-step reality of those sacred minutes when life dissolves into eternity. My soul hungered for something more tangible than theory. The more I searched, the deeper my unease became. How could I portray Christ on screen? offering words of eternal comfort when I was secretly stumbling through shadows myself. Each time I stepped into a scene as Jesus, speaking with unwavering assurance, my own heart whispered doubt. I feared I was giving audiences hope I could not honestly claim for myself. That dissonance grew unbearable. It all reached a breaking point one day on set. We were filming a scene where Jesus comforts someone terrified of dying. The words in the script were radiant with assurance, shimmering with peace, but as I spoke them, they felt hollow in my mouth. I wasn't proclaiming truth. I was reciting lines. I felt a fissure between the Christ I embodied and the man behind the costume, one filled with unanswered questions. After the take, I excused myself. I could no longer hide the fracture inside me. That night, sleep refused me. I tossed, replaying Thomas's death, his daughter's trembling questions, the letter from the mother who lost her son. Faces and voices crowded my mind. Real people, desperate for answers I didn't have. Their longing became my own, their ache echoing in my chest. 2 nights ago, I reached the limit. After another day of filming death and resurrection scenes, I wandered out onto my deck at 2 a.m. The city was hushed in the distance, its lights faint against the vast darkness. Above me, the stars blazed as though the veil of night had thinned. The canyon below lay still, every tree frozen, as if creation itself was waiting. I dropped to my knees and began to pray, not with polished words, but with raw, breaking honesty. Jesus, I can't keep living like this. I need to know. Not ideas, not guesses. Truth. What happens to a soul in those first moments after death? Please show me, not for me alone, but for the families who look into my eyes, for the grieving who write to me, for every person who whispers into the silence of a hospital room. Where are they now? I poured out names. The mother with the teenage son, Thomas's daughter, countless fans whose letters carried the ache of unanswered questions. I prayed for them all, my voice shaking, my tears dampening the wood beneath me. The night stretched on as I begged for clarity, for revelation, for anything that could pierce the mystery. Then, just as the first edges of dawn began to warm the horizon, something shifted. The air thickened, not with wind, but with presence. The sounds of waking birds, the distant hum of the city, even the rustle of leaves, all faded into silence. It felt as though time itself was holding its breath. And then he came. The presence was undeniable, weighty yet tender, holy yet familiar. My eyes lifted, and there he was, Jesus closer than I had ever imagined, seated beside me as though he had always been there. This was not a fleeting vision or a fragile dream. This was real, more real than anything I had ever touched. He said my name. Just one word. Jonathan. And every barrier inside me collapsed. His voice carried eternity within it, yet it wrapped around me like the gentlest embrace. You've been asking, he said, not out of curiosity, but because you know how deeply people need the truth. They don't want illusions. They don't want empty comfort. They want to know who I am when the final breath is drawn. As he spoke, the fear I had carried for so long began to dissolve. Death no longer loomed like a black wall. It opened before me like a doorway. I will show you, Jesus continued, not with words alone, but with sight. You will see Thomas's first hour beyond death, and through it, you will understand what every soul experiences in that sacred passage. My heart thundered, torn between awe and trembling. For the first time, I realized I was about to witness the mystery that had haunted me all my life. The first hour, he said, is not about judgment. It is not about punishment or reward. It is about three sacred processes that I personally oversee. Three things every soul encounters, no matter who they are, no matter how they die, no matter what they believed. The weight of his words struck me like fire. No one dies alone. No one is abandoned to confusion or cast into eternity without guidance. He himself walks with every soul. Are you ready to see? He asked. His eyes held both the compassion of a friend and the authority of the Creator. I nodded, trembling. And then the veil tore open. I saw Thomas in the instant after his final breath, not swallowed by darkness, not left in silence, but surrounded by a radiant current of love. It moved toward him, through him, enfolding him like a tide. The first process, Jesus whispered, is recognition of love, and everything I thought I knew about death shattered. I watched, trembling, as Thomas entered what Jesus called the first process, the recognition of love. There was no terror in his eyes, no sense of being cast adrift into a cold void. Instead, his soul was met with the very essence of love itself, a current so real it shimmered like living light. It wasn't the introduction of a stranger, it was the unveiling of a presence he had known all along. Jesus leaned close and whispered, "This is why it's called recognition, not discovery." He's realizing that every warm embrace, every laugh shared with friends, every gentle word spoken in kindness, those were all me, loving him through others. The truth shook me. Thomas wasn't startled to see Jesus. He gazed at him with the familiarity of one recognizing a lifelong companion. I could see the emotions cascade across his face: astonishment, relief, then joy. Suddenly, countless moments of his life replayed before him, not like a courtroom trial, but like a story woven with love. Birthdays with his family, the steady eyes of his wife on their anniversary, the voices of his children seeking his wisdom. Each memory glowed with meaning, and then something even more profound happened. Thomas began to see not only the love he had received, but the love he had given. Jesus showed him how every word of encouragement, every sacrifice, every quiet act of care was not just Thomas being good. It was divine love flowing through him. When anyone offers love, Jesus said softly, they are participating in my very nature, whether they realize it or not. I felt undone. Thomas wasn't being judged by failures or sins first. He was being healed through the revelation of love. Fear melted away, regret dissolved, and even shame lost its grip as he saw how deeply loved he had been, and how much love he himself had given. His face, once marked by the long shadows of cancer and struggle, now radiated with freedom. I turned to Jesus and asked what burned in my heart. But what of those who lived without much love? The cruel, the broken, the selfish. His gaze deepened with compassion. Even they have received love, he said. A mother's embrace, a stranger's kindness, a fleeting moment of connection. No soul is untouched, and even the hardest heart has offered love, if only once. I used those moments, however small, as the doorway. And then I saw it. Lives marked by suffering, bitterness, or failure. Yet even in them, Jesus uncovered moments of love. A father holding his newborn for the first time. A weary addict feeding a stray dog. A child offering a smile to a grieving teacher. These small sparks became anchors for recognition. That realization overwhelmed me. No one begins eternity with nothing. Every soul, no matter how broken, enters the first hour greeted by the undeniable truth that they were loved and had given love. As Thomas absorbed this revelation, I saw decades of regret lift from him like smoke carried away by wind. Mistakes no longer chained him. He was embraced not by accusation, but by recognition. Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is always the beginning," he said. "Once they know how perfectly loved they were, and once they see how love moved through their own lives, they are ready for the next step." And with that, the vision shifted. I saw Thomas again, but now Jesus unveiled the second process, the understanding of purpose. His life began to unfold before him, not as isolated fragments of joy and pain, but as a tapestry. Every trial, every triumph, every moment of waiting and wondering was revealed to carry meaning far deeper than he ever imagined. Jesus said, "Nothing is wasted. Every joy prepared his soul for greater joy. Every hardship enlarged his capacity for compassion. Even his suffering was not meaningless. It shaped him, strengthened him, prepared him." Thomas's battle with illness had tested his family's faith and inspired his church to pray with new intensity. His quiet courage had given his children a lasting model of strength. Even the financial struggles of his younger years had forged a resilience that became a blessing to others. And then, more staggering still, Jesus revealed the ripple effects. The kindness Thomas had shown to a discouraged co-worker had renewed that man's hope, who in turn encouraged his own family. His patient care for his mother had echoed through generations, inspiring his children to care for him with the same love. Small, overlooked actions had rippled outward into eternity. I could see Thomas's eyes widen as gratitude replaced confusion. What once felt like wasted suffering or unanswered prayers now blazed with eternal meaning. Still, I could not hold back my question. But what of those whose lives seem wasted? The ones cut short, the broken, the lost. Jesus' eyes softened again. Even their lives are full of meaning. A child who lives only a few days can transform an entire family through love. A person who battles hidden illness may ignite resilience in others. No life is without weight in eternity. He showed me images of souls who had carried unthinkable burdens, disabilities, addiction, grief, and yet their pain became the seed of compassion in others, their endurance a testimony that shaped lives they would never know on earth. And I understood. No story is wasted. Every life is a thread in a vast divine tapestry. Jesus turned to me once more. This is why no one enters eternity feeling forgotten. Each soul sees the meaning woven through their story. Only then are they ready for the third process. And as Thomas's face shone with gratitude, I saw it begin. The preparation for fullness. I stood in awe as Thomas's soul entered what Jesus called the preparation for fullness. If the recognition of love had lifted fear and the understanding of purpose had erased confusion, this final process was something altogether different. It was expansion. It was transformation. It was the stretching of a soul so that it could contain the weight of eternity. I saw Jesus draw near to Thomas and begin a work that cannot be described as repair, but rather as restoration. Every scar etched into his spirit by years of illness and disappointment, every crack left by grief or regret was being filled with light. It wasn't the erasing of his story. It was the completion of it. The man who had suffered, who had endured weakness, who had wondered if he had failed, was now emerging as the man he had always been meant to be. Jesus said, "On earth, Human beings must live with limits. Their minds cannot grasp eternity. Their hearts cannot bear its weight. Their bodies cannot endure its glory. Here, those limits fall away. I expand them so that joy doesn't crush them, but crowns them. Thomas seemed to shine, as though his soul were being stretched wider, deeper, stronger, until it could carry infinite wonder. His laughter, his gratitude, his love, it all grew more intense, more radiant, more alive than anything he had ever known in his earthly life. He was not dissolving into some shapeless spirit. He was becoming more himself than ever before. I watched Jesus touch the tender places in Thomas's memory. Old wounds of rejection, hidden failures he had carried silently, insecurities that had once weighed him down, all of them melted away like snow under the sun. In their place grew a holy confidence, not rooted in pride, but in the certainty of perfect love. "Do you see?" Jesus whispered to me. "Here, the soul is healed completely. Nothing fractured remains. Nothing broken is left unmade. What they feared defined them is now only a shadow swallowed by light." Then Thomas began to receive orientation, real understanding of what eternity would hold. Not vague images of endless singing or floating in clouds, but concrete glimpses of purpose, creativity, and relationship. He was shown that his role in eternity would flow directly out of his earthly story. Because he had borne suffering with courage, he would now become a mentor to others who had endured pain, guiding them into healing and joy. His life had trained him for an eternal calling. I saw his face light with excitement, not weariness. Eternity wasn't passive. It was alive with meaning, filled with work that was joyful, with growth that never ends, with relationships that deepened instead of fading. Every moment was charged with significance. Thomas wasn't entering rest as escape. He was entering rest as fulfillment. Jesus turned to me again. This is what so many misunderstand. Eternal life is not the stripping away of personality, but the unveiling of its fullness. They are more themselves here than they ever managed to be on earth, because fear, sin, and sorrow no longer hold them back. As I stood watching Thomas transformed, I realized something that took my breath away. Every single soul is given this preparation. No one steps into eternity half-formed, confused, or crippled by the past. Each person is made whole, expanded, healed, and prepared so that when joy comes rushing in, they can bear it. By the end of Thomas's first hour, I no longer saw a frail man who had battled cancer. I saw a soul radiant with strength, pulsing with joy, shining with divine purpose. He had become what he was always meant to be. And then Jesus looked at me with a smile that carried both tenderness and gravity. "Now you see," he said, "why I told you the first hour after death is not about judgment, not about fear, not about being cast away. It is about love, purpose, and preparation. This is the foundation upon which all else rests." The weight of his words pressed on me like fire. The mystery of death, which had once haunted me with dread, was no longer dark. It was revealed as a passage designed with exquisite care. And yet I sensed there was more. Jesus' gaze shifted toward the horizon, and the air thickened again with holy stillness. "What you have seen in Thomas," he said, "is not for him alone. This truth must be carried to the grieving, to the fearful, to those who wait for their final breath. It must be spoken carefully, with wisdom, with compassion, but it must be spoken. For when people understand this, everything changes. How they face death, how they mourn, how they live." My heart pounded. I knew the vision was not over. What I had witnessed in the sacred unveiling of Thomas's first hour was about to widen into something even greater. And then, like the pulling back of a curtain, the vision shifted again. The vision widened, carrying me beyond Thomas's first hour into something that pulsed with even greater urgency. Jesus' voice was steady, but it carried the weight of eternity. "What you have seen is not for your comfort alone," he said. "It is a truth meant for the living, for the grieving, for those trembling at the threshold of death. It is meant to free them from fear." I saw Thomas's daughter again, the one who had sent me the message filled with aching questions. In this vision, she was receiving the answers she longed for. No vague platitudes, no fragile guesses, but the vivid reality of her father's first hour. Recognition of perfect love, revelation of divine purpose, and preparation for eternal joy. I watched as her grief shifted. The guilt that she hadn't done enough dissolved. The fear of what her father endured faded, and in its place rose gratitude. She could now picture him radiant, healed, embraced. Her mourning became something sacred, not hollow sorrow, but holy peace. Then Jesus spoke of the mother who lost her teenage son in the car crash. "She needs to know," he said, "that the words she whispered to him as he died were not false comfort. They were truth. I was there." He recognized me in the love he had known his whole life. His first hour was not pain or fear. It was wonder. And I saw her too, receiving that revelation, her face softening as years of doubt and torment were lifted. Her tears turned from grief to joy, because she finally understood. Her son had stepped straight into perfect love. The vision swept on, and I saw families, churches, even entire communities transformed. Where once death was spoken of in hushed tones and avoided in fear, now it was embraced as a passage carefully designed by God. Funerals turned into celebrations, not shallow attempts to mask loss, but deep, authentic gratitude for what their loved ones had entered. Parents began teaching their children that death was not the end, but a doorway into love itself. Marriages grew gentler, more purposeful, because couples realized their love was participation in something eternal. Even prayer changed, from begging to be spared suffering to asking for strength to grow through it. Jesus turned to me, and his eyes searched mine. "Do you see? This truth transforms how people live. When they know that every act of love, every trial, every hidden struggle carries eternal weight, they stop living in fear. They stop wasting their days on empty pursuits. They begin to love with abandon, forgive more freely, endure with greater hope." And then he addressed the question that had lingered in my heart. What about judgment? What about heaven and hell? His answer was firm, but filled with tenderness. Justice does not vanish in eternity, but it is not the opposite of love. It flows from love. Recognition of love does not erase consequence. It reveals the foundation of every soul's story. Understanding of purpose does not mean every choice was good. It means even broken choices can be woven into something redemptive. Preparation for fullness does not make eternity uniform. It shapes each soul for the measure of joy they are ready to receive. Love is always the beginning, the middle, and the end. The weight of that truth pierced me. Judgment was not a contradiction to love. It was the form love takes when truth is revealed. Eternity was not chaos, not randomness, not punishment without reason. It was deliberate, intimate, just, and deeply good. When the vision lifted, I found myself back on my deck. The canyon was the same, the stars fading before dawn, but nothing felt the same. Death no longer loomed over me as humanity's darkest mystery. It had been unveiled as its most beautiful passage. Since that night, I've begun sharing this revelation in quiet places, with families holding on to grief, with patients in hospice care, with people paralyzed by fear of their final hour. And every time, I have seen something remarkable. Fear dissolves, dread turns to peace, mourning shifts into reverence. People begin to face death not as a thief, but as a homecoming. And perhaps the most startling change is in me. I no longer fear my own end. I no longer shrink from the thought of those I love passing before me. I know now what awaits: recognition of love, understanding of purpose, preparation for fullness, and that changes everything. Before I end, let me pray for you. Father, for every soul trembling at the thought of death, replace fear with peace. For every family grieving in darkness, flood them with the light of this truth. For those nearing their final hour, let them feel not dread, but anticipation of the love that waits to receive them. And for every heart listening now, let this revelation transform the way they live, teaching them to love deeply, to endure faithfully, to see their lives as threads in your eternal design. In Jesus' name, amen. If this truth has shifted something in you, share it in the comments below. Let others know how it changes the way you see death or the way you carry grief, and consider subscribing so together we can keep walking deeper into these mysteries, not with fear, but with hope. Remember this: the first hour after death is not terror, not confusion, not abandonment. It is recognition, revelation, and preparation. It is love itself reaching out to welcome you home.